Our next set of notes in this unit is intelligence, and this is our introduction to intelligence of what is it? Why do we have it? Is it inborn or does it change over time? Can it be quantified? That's kind of what we're going to talk about in this section. So let's first talk about what intelligence is. So intelligence in every culture is the capacity to understand the world. And our capacity to think rationally and be able to use resources effectively. In research, intelligence is whatever the intelligence test measures. So basically it's your operational definition, right? You get to decide what intelligence is in a research study. Usually school smarts are tested in a research study. So usually that's what intelligence means. However, psychologists believe that intelligence is a concept, not a thing. So when we think of intelligence as like a trait of like someone is born intelligent or not intelligent, we commit an error called reification. Basically, it's viewing an abstract, immaterial concept as if it were a concrete thing. Intelligence is not a concrete thing, right? It is this concept that we have. And there's a lot of disagreement among psychologists about how to measure intelligence, and really intelligence in general. And the two big controversies are, is intelligence like an overall ability? Can we just measure someone's intelligence overall? Or is intelligence broken down into several different abilities? And then also, the other controversy is, can we locate and measure intelligence? Is there a quantifiable way for us to tell whether or not someone is intelligent or not? So we're going to talk about both these things. We're going to first talk about types of intelligence and the psychologists who believe certain ideas of what intelligence is. The first person we're going to talk about is Charles Spearman. And he believed that there was one single general factor, the general factor that all forms of intelligence then are under. He denied that some people have outstanding talents, right? So some people are better at some things than others. But he did not believe that those should change or give us any specifics on their general intelligence. So he believed in this overall intelligence. And we call it the G factor, okay? So he proposed that general intelligence is linked to many clusters that can be analyzed by factor analysis and create an underlying aspect of intelligence. For example, if you do well in a vocabulary, people who do well in vocabulary also do well on paragraph comprehension, and this cluster helps us define verbal intelligence. Other general factors include spatial ability and reasoning ability. So we have different things that lead up to our overall G factor of intelligence, okay? So we combine a bunch of things into one major score. This is kind of like your overall ACT score, right? You have your individual scores that lead up to that overall score in ACT. So Thurstone was a critic of Spearman. He thought that subjects did not have one single scale of general intelligence. He thought there were 7 clusters of primary mental abilities. And these are the 7 different clusters that Thurstone believed in. Word fluency, verbal comprehension, spatial ability, perceptual speed, numerical ability, inductive reasoning, and memory. Notice none of those deal with like spatial there's one spatial, but no real like motor intelligence or anything like that, okay? However, later psychologists analyzed Thurstone's data and a persistent tendency between these clusters. Those who excelled in one area also scored well in the others, giving us some evidence that all 7 of these clusters could be grouped under the single G factor. Okay, so this G factor is that underlying aspect of intelligence. Think about it this way. you probably know someone who's athletic. What makes them athletic? Can you define that? Being athletic is a good analogy to having G, right? Our G factor. If they are good in one sport, they are normally good in other sports. Let's look at some examples. Michael Jordan. He is the greatest NBA player of all time. Argue with me if you wish, but that's what I believe. Plus, he played minor league baseball, and he also was a good golf player, athletic in many different ways. Kyler Murray, he's the Heisman Trophy winner. He was the #1 pick in the NFL, and he also turned down a major money for a first-round pick in the MLB. So really athletic in major ways. Justin Timberlake, okay? I know he's not an athlete, but look at his music abilities, right? He's really good at golf, but he's also really talented in really entered the entertainment business, right? Musician, dancing, acting, all of that. He's good at everything that he seems to do well. So this is the idea of the G factor, right? That they have this underlying ability to do well. However, other psychologists and researchers disagree with Spearman. Let's talk about some of them. The first one is Howard Gardner. You've probably heard of Gardner's multiple intelligences, and he's pretty famous in the psychology world. Basically, he saw that brain damage can diminish one type of ability, so maybe your verbal ability, but not diminish others. So there must be different facets of intelligence that we have. He supports Thurstone's idea that intelligence comes in multiple forms. And his idea is multiple intelligences. He proposed 9 different forms of intelligence. And these 9 forms of intelligence are relatively independent of the others. So let's look at each of them. So the first is our verbal linguistic intelligence. This is our capacity to use language, to express what's on your mind, and to understand other people. So not only to express what you're saying, but to understand what people are saying to you. Our logistical or mathematical intelligence is our ability to understand the underlying principles of some sort of causal system. Okay, so logistics kind of ideas. Visual spatial is our ability to present the spatial world internally in your mind. Can you look at something and then see it again in your mind? Musical or rhythmic, capacity to think in music, to be able to hear patterns, recognize them, and perhaps manipulate them. We know that some people are better at this than others. Our bodily or kinesthetic, which is that athleticism, right? The capacity to use whole parts of your body, solve a problem, make something, or put on a production. The naturalist, the ability to discriminate among living things, as well as sensitivity to other features of the natural world. So really this is the intelligence of us to distinguish between different species of different animals or plants, etc., etc. Intrapersonal, understanding of yourself. Intra means inner, like inside, okay? So knowing who you are and what you can or cannot do. Some people are better at knowing your abilities than others. Interpersonal is the ability to understand other people. Inter means outside, okay? And then existential is the ability to pose and ponder questions about life, death, and then ultimate realities, like those big, existential, kind of deep questions that we think of, philosophical questions, right? So Gardner believed that we all have different levels of all of these different things, and that you can be really, really good in one of these and not so great in another. Savant syndrome is the idea that someone has an extremely high ability in one specific area, and then they have deficits in another. So, for example, someone might be really, really, really great in their logical or mathematical abilities, but this interpersonal, the ability to understand other people's ideas and feelings, is not so great, okay? Or maybe they're really gifted in music. They're a gifted pianist, right? But they really don't understand the connections between other people. That could be savant syndrome. I'm not going to show you this video on here, but it's in the slides if you want to reference it later. It shows an example of a savant. Okay, so Sternberg believed that we have multiple intelligence, right? He believed that we have different categories that we can break intelligence down into. However, he suggests that there's 3 different categories rather than the 8 or 9 that Gardner came up with. So the triarchic theory is Sternberg. And let's look at these 3 different intelligences that Sternberg came up with. Okay, so practical, creative, and analytical. So analytical is going to be assessed by our intelligence tests. Okay, those are going to be, can you solve problems? Can you analyze something? Creative intelligence is going to be intelligence that makes us adapt to novel situations. Can we come up with a new solution to a problem? And then practical intelligence, everyday tasks. This is our street smarts. Some of us have better street smarts than others, okay? So that's our practical intelligence. This is the triarchic theory of intelligence. So analytical is like our book smarts, right? Creative is, can we solve a problem in a new way? And then practical is going to be our street smarts. However, Sternberg believed that there were mixtures of all 3 of these different types of intelligences. So you could be the analyzer, who you're really, really great in that analytical intelligence, right? You do well in academic environments, but you're not really creative in the field. However, you could also be an analytical creator. You analyze created ideas. You look at ideas and you are like, huh, that was a really good idea. However, I'm not really great at like telling you how I did that. The creator generates ideas easily, but really it's hard for someone who creates these ideas to like analyze them and put them into practice. So how can this work? I have this really awesome idea, but how am I going to put it into practice? The analytical practitioner is going to succeed in conventional terms, right? Because they have a high IQ in practical work, but really this person isn't going to make a long-lasting contribution to the workplace because they have high street smarts, but they're not really great at like putting it all together. The practitioner is going to be persuasive and maybe entertaining, but really their depth of thinking is pretty shallow. And then the creative practitioner has the ability to come up with new ideas, can persuade other people to do those ideas, and but really whether or not the ideas are worth it, whether they are working and doing what they need to be done, is where they fall short. We can also have the consummate balancer, which is the ability to apply all 3 of these intelligence as needed, and therefore the best position to make a valuable contribution to society. So they are going to do all 3 of these things all of the time. So our next psychologist is Daniel Goleman, and he believes in emotional intelligence. So he believes that there is a separate type of intelligence that we refer to as EQ, and this is going to be our ability to recognize, assess, evaluate, regulate our emotions. So this is not like those conventional smarts that we think of, but it is that emotional intelligence, whether or not we can assess someone else's emotions, assess our own emotions, regulate them, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, this allows us to get along well with others, right? Some people might not be really high in those traditional IQ scores, but they're really good at like reading people, right? So someone might be really great at like talking to someone and like connecting with them, but they're not so great on like IQ tests. So the different components of emotional intelligence are going to be our perceived emotions, so recognizing emotions in faces, musics, and stories, so being able to determine whether or not there is emotion. Understanding emotions, so can we predict them, how they are going to change, and then managing emotions, which is how we're going to express an emotion in a different situation.